Hello, my name is HAPruitt, and I am the author of the Anathalian series, and I am also an editor. And this video and this video series is going to be about editing your book. I'm going to explain how to edit a book, all the stages, all the steps. Not all steps are going to be absolutely necessary to edit a book, but all of the steps will be helpful in making your book the best it can be, whether you're traditional publishing or self-publishing. A lot of them will apply to both before you even get your book to the point of sending it to query or sending it to an editor. This will help you self-edit your book to make it the best it can be. If you want to know about my editing services or the 4 types of editing, I have that in a video, and I'll put that video down in the description you can watch. If you're interested in hiring me as an editor, or you just want to know like the basics of the 4 types of editing, then you can watch that video linked in the description. And if you have any questions or if you have suggestions of editing topics, please leave them in the comments. So I'm going to go ahead and get to the video for this week. So this is the 8th video in the How to Edit a Book series. This one is going to be about making a timeline. Again, like a lot of the videos have been since video 3, this fits in with video 3 while you're doing those rereading and editing rounds, rereading, letting it rest rounds. This is one thing you could do during that. So make a timeline. This step can happen while you're doing self-edits. I just said that in this, okay. In this video, we're going to talk about what kind of timeline do you need? Do you need a timeline for every story and every genre? And do you need to use a timeline during editing if you already made one during planning? And then number 4, why is a timeline helpful? So the first 2 questions, the kind of timeline you need depends on your story and genre. If your story takes place over a short period of time, like a short story that happens in one stream of time with no breaks, like an hour, and the characters just have the action and then it's done and there's no breaks, like a short story often is, then you may not need a timeline because it happens in one space of time. So you may not need a timeline for that. But any other story, you probably want a timeline. Even if it is a very short story or a very clear timeline, you still want a timeline. So the kind of, again, like I said, the kind of timeline is going to depend. So a couple examples here to kind of give you an idea. If your story has any time breaks at all, like the action starts and stops later, like you have time here and time here and time here and time here, even if it's chronological, then make a timeline. This would be like, I wrote a short story not long ago and it happened over like a week of time, and like it was very clear, like this is Monday, this is Tuesday, this is Wednesday, this is Friday. And I still like just got a little piece of paper and I wrote down, like, this is what happens Monday, this is what happens Tuesday, and it was a very simple timeline, but it still helped me keep track of what day it was when I was writing. And when I was editing, it helped me keep track of, did I keep the right things on the right day? So you can make a really simple timeline if your timeline is just very direct. That was a contemporary story where it's like modern times in Earth, something that could very much happen in Earth. And so I just had to say like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And that was all I needed for my timeline. And that works for a simple timeline that takes over a short period of time. So next example, a fantasy or a sci-fi, especially a long series. Definitely make a timeline according to the fantasy world's calendar. According to the fantasy world's calendar, you need to calendar for yourself. Even if it's exactly like Earth, so you have 12 months, 7 days a week, all that jazz, still make a timeline for your fantasy world. Make a calendar for your fantasy world. And include all the events relevant to the story, even if only mentioned in the story. So what I mean by that is Anathalian. My Anathalian series is 8 books, but more happens. So okay, stick with me for a second. So in Anathalian, there's the current story. These 4 kids go to Anathalian and their story starts, because it's a portal fantasy, they come from our world, so their story starts about when our school year starts, so in August. And I wrote down like August 14th, and I wrote it down in our time, and then I made a calendar for Anathalian, and they have 12 months like we have, but they have 6 days in a week, instead of 7 days in a week. And they have their own times and holidays and all those things. So I transferred it from ours to theirs. I got an old calendar. I wrote down everything. And then I just wrote it on our calendar, the days that would go through theirs. And it didn't always match up with our months, because they have some longer months and some shorter months. But I just wrote it down so I know which day in our calendar corresponds with which day in their calendar. And then from there, I made their calendar. It's kind of confusing when I talk about it, but if you just start doing it off of a world-based, earth-based calendar, it helps you kind of get a sense of how much time is passing. Or it may not. You may think differently than me. But however you do it, that helps. And so I got the current story. So there's this current story happening, and it's chronological. It happens like most of the time in Anathalian happens like day by day. There is a period of time in the first book that like 3 months pass, and it's never really mentioned in the book how much time passed, because Kendall is the main character and she doesn't know how much time passes. But I need to know how much time passes, because I need to know the exact day, because it's very important, because there's an exact day that something happens in the book. The new evil ruler is going to take the throne. I need to know what day that happens. And if I don't know, then the whole story is like messed up. So all that to say, there's a current story. And then what I was talking about, include events on your timeline that aren't in the story but are relevant to the story. There's a big backstory happening in Anathalian, and I need to know the events that happened in the backstory, because they also line up with the evil throne. And so the events in the backstory have to converge on the same day. Like, let's say it's not, but let's say it's like April 4th. The evil throne is going to transfer on April 4th. And so the backstory timeline has to line up with the forward story, the current story timeline, and they all have to converge on April 4th. And I need to know this, and I need to write all those events on my timeline, even though not all these events show up in every single book, in order to make sure every single event that every single book all lines up. That's very confusing, but if you write a fantasy series that is epic, you're going to have to do this. I edited for a client, and she has like 800 years, and she made this big old huge timeline, and I'm like, yes, thank you. So she knows. And I've even in her books, even though she made her timeline, when I'm editing her books, I've noticed sometimes it says 200 and sometimes it says 800 years, and somewhere she must have changed something. And so we'll get to the point later about that. When you make a timeline, when you plan, you still need to make a timeline when you edit. But so I could catch those because she has this timeline set up, and she was like 800 years. So when it said 200 years, I could be like, oh, that's wrong, and we could fix it. So I hope that's not too confusing about why you need a fantasy timeline and what to include in your fantasy timeline. That can include sci-fi too. And it could probably include any genre, but fantasy is the one where you have like all these different backstories happening, and you have your own world, and it's different than our world. So contemporary romance, okay. Point 1 and 2 again, we're back to it. The kind of timeline you need depends on your story and genre. So contemporary and romance, you may think, oh, it's contemporary, it just happens with our calendar and Earth, people are going to understand, I don't need a timeline. You need a timeline. Even if it seems very straightforward to you, it may not seem straightforward to your readers. I edited a contemporary book, and it was for somebody who lives in Canada, and even though they have exactly the same calendar as us, their seasons happen differently. And so it was kind of confusing to me, but she sent me a timeline, and I was like, okay, I understand it. She explained, like, we have longer winters, and, you know, okay, where I live, it's weird, but we're not going to get into that. I live in the Midwest, and it can be 80 degrees in January. And right now we're almost in June, and it's 60 degrees outside. So whatever. The weather's weird. But, anyway, the point there is not everybody is going to understand your contemporary book like you. And so you need to know your timeline so it does make sense, really. Even if it confuses other people, it
truly makes sense, because it's so easy for you to get caught up in, okay, this is where I live and this is what happens and I know it, and then not explain it in your book, and then it ends up sounding confusing. And also, in contemporary, definitely make a timeline to track events in real time. Pick a real year. Like I said, go to an old calendar or the current calendar. Pick a year and say, okay, this is the day my story happens, and do it on the calendar so you know when you run into holidays or seasons or different things. Because if you say like 4 months pass in the book and you never run into a different season, then something's wrong there, because, you know, each season's like 3-4 months. 3 months. 3 times 4 is 12. Okay, each season is like 3 months. I'm not good at math. But you need to consider those factors, because if your story's going along during winter and it like 4 months happened during winter and Christmas never happens, that's kind of odd. Christmas ought to happen in your book, and so you need to include that in your book if you want your book to happen during that time and go over that span of time. It's just not realistic to not have that. So make a timeline in contemporary or contemporary romance to make sure you make it realistic. Okay, and then historical fiction. You just need to be correct. Like if you're doing historical fiction, get the event calendar of that time and stick to it. Be correct. Sorry. I've never done historical fiction. I have edited historical fiction, but I haven't done it myself. But I know it requires so much research. You need to be correct in as many areas as necessary for historical fiction, and definitely the time frame needs to be correct. So overall, the answer to the question, the kind of timeline you need, depends on the story and genre. The more time you deal with a story, the more in-depth your timeline is going to be. And the more realistic you want it to be, like historical fiction, the more work you're going to have to do on your timeline. Yeah, so that sums that up. Okay, that was a big answer. Okay, and then my next 2 points, let's go back up to the top. Do I need to use a timeline during editing if I already made one and used one during planning? Let's answer that. Yes. When you edit, make a timeline according to what you wrote, not what you planned to write. Because it's so easy when you initially write it and you say, okay, this is the plan. I'm going to initially write it like this. And then in between initially writing it and all those rounds of editing, you put in things, you cut out things, you switch things around, you do this, you do that. And then when you get here, it may be totally different than what you planned. And so it's necessary when you edit to make a timeline, again, according to what you read, not what you think it ought to be, according to what you read. And this is where an editor can really help you. Many times the person says, okay, this is my timeline I made when I planned this. And I read it and I say, this is the timeline I got. And they're like, oh, that's different. I'm like, yeah, that's different. And I can point to different places in the story where it shows me why it's so different from your original timeline. And it's usually they switched something, they didn't mention something, something got taken out, something got put in, and like it really changes the story up. So make that timeline while you're editing to see if it does match up. And if it doesn't match up, make your changes accordingly to make it work. However you need to make it work. It may be a little tweak, like one of the projects I was editing for someone else, it was just like she didn't mention something. And so she just needed to mention something and then it was fixed. Just one mention and it fixed everything. Some other times I've edited and it's like, it sounds like you took this piece from here and now it's over here. And so like the day that happened here is now like a year later and it's very confusing and it's a lot of patchwork. But do that so you can fix it before the reader gets it. Okay, and then number 4. Why is a timeline helpful? We've probably said a lot of reasons already. My throat's not going to hold up. Why is a timeline helpful? You will not remember every detail. That's why. And having a reference helps. Also, consistency. When you're mentioning history, when you're saying it's been months or it's been weeks, this is the most often mistake with timeline. With a timeline, people will, in their stories, a character will say, oh, it's been months, and it's been like 2 days. Or they say like, oh, it's been weeks, and it's been a year. And it just doesn't line up. When time passes vaguely and you don't really know how much time passes, and you have a character been like, oh, it's been a long time, and you're like, it's actually been a couple hours, not a long time. That's the most often mess up I see. It sounds like people haven't had a timeline, and so they just kind of guess, and they guess wrong, because when you're a reader, you really focus on that. At least I do. Maybe that's because it's my job. But I really focus on like what time it is and how much time has passed. And so when the characters say something that's the opposite, it's like, something's very wrong. And that's going to be your sign that you need a timeline. That you need to work on your timeline. You probably always need a timeline, but you need to work on your timeline. Consistency. Okay, so another reason why you need a timeline. When characters split ways and multiple points of view need to match. Okay, that's a big one. I'm going to say this, try to be brief. In the Anathalian series, the book 5 that I'm working on right now, there are like 5 points of view. Okay? And I'm going to have to make a big timeline for this. I'm dreading it, so I haven't done it yet. But I've made a timeline up to this point. So everything's okay up to this point in the series, book 5. But there are 5 points of views happening. And I'm going to have to make sure that when it's nighttime for everybody. When this event happens for everybody. When it's this day for everybody. And if 5 days happen in this point of view, 5 days have to happen in this point of view, and this point of view, and this point of view. You need a timeline so everything matches up with your points of view. When you have multiple points of view, it gets like tricky and you gotta juggle things, but you can do it if you make a timeline. Okay. And then the last reason why a timeline is helpful, correctness and realism. We have talked about this, and very simply, I wrote, having 4 Mondays in a row is dumb. Having 4 Mondays in a row is dumb. And that's an extreme example, but like, you can't have Halloween and then 2 days later have Christmas. Like, you know, you want to hit the big holidays, but you got to have time in between there. And just certain things, you want to be correct. You want to have realism with your timelines. And you want your readers to feel like they're in this real world. Whether it be the real world or whether it be a fantasy world, you want it to feel real. And having a true timeline will help that. And will immerse your readers in the story. I don't know why my voice isn't holding up, but it's not. So that's all. I'm going to send you to the wrap up. So that is the editing tip for this week. Please like this video. Please leave a comment. Please share this video with others. Please check out that video of my editing services and the 4 types of editing in the description below. And remember, this video is part of a series. So please watch the series so you can make your book the best that it can be. If you want to know more about Anathalian or HAPruitt, please follow me on Instagram at HAPruitt. You can find me on Amazon as an Amazon author, HAPruitt. Please watch my YouTube channel and all my cool videos on my channel, HAPruitt Anathalian. You can find me on the Facebook page, HAPruitt Anathalian. You can follow me on Goodreads by the name HAPruitt and the book Anathalian, or you can go to my website where so much cool stuff about Anathalian is. The website is HAPruitt.com.